The sound of rain echoed against the stone walls of the imperial palace. Aelius Varro, once a general of unmatched valor and a Stoic disciple, stood at the edge of a towering balcony. His sharp gaze was fixed on the city below, Rome, veiled in mist and melancholy. Once the beating heart of his soul, now it looked like a fading ghost. Just a year ago, Aelius had everything: power, a loyal army, respect from the emperor himself. But more than all that, he had clarity, a life guided by reason, discipline, and the Stoic way. His life was a sculpture carved by principles. But one event shattered that marble. It began when the emperor summoned Aelius with a mission, one laced with corruption. Aelius was ordered to suppress a peaceful rebellion in the province of Lyria. Farmers and scholars had stood up against unjust taxation. It was not war they sought, but fairness. Aelius refused. He believed in justice, not blind obedience. That refusal cost him everything. Stripped of his rank, accused of treason, and exiled from Rome, Aelius became a man hated by many, misunderstood by more. He retreated to a ruined villa by the sea, far from the crowds, with only the writings of Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius to keep him company. For months, he barely spoke. His mind was a storm of regret, shame, and questions. Had he done the right thing? Was virtue worth such a price? Then, one night, as thunder rolled over the coastline, a knock came at his door. A boy. Barely 16. Dirty, shaking, but holding something tightly under his cloak. A letter. Sealed with the imperial emblem. "Are you Aelius Varro?" the boy asked. Aelius said nothing. But his eyes, once filled with fire, narrowed. The letter was from a senator, a secret ally. He wrote of whispers in Rome. Plots. The emperor's madness. And a need for someone incorruptible. Someone like Aelius. But Aelius was no longer that man. Or was he? He stared out at the ocean, the scroll in his hand. His knuckles white. The waves crashed like drums of destiny. And for the first time in months, he stood tall. Not as a soldier, but as a man ready to rise again. The dawn was gray, heavy with salt and silence. Aelius sat by the shore, the senator's letter clutched in his hand like a forgotten sword. His cloak flapped in the sea wind, worn thin by time, yet he sat like a statue, motionless, deep in thought. He hadn't spoken to anyone in months. The boy who had delivered the letter slept nearby, curled in a blanket by the fire. Aelius watched him with guarded eyes. The boy reminded him of himself, once full of questions, now full of silence. The letter burned in his pocket, not from fire, but from the weight of its message. The empire was rotting from within. The emperor, once wise and measured, had fallen into paranoia. Good men vanished. New laws favored the cruel. And now, a faction of secret Stoics in the Senate sought someone untouched by the rot. Someone they could trust. But Aelius had doubts. "I am not that man anymore," he whispered to the waves. "I walked away." Yet the ocean, in its ancient rhythm, offered no answer. Only the crash of surf and the cry of gulls. Later, over a fire of dry driftwood, Aelius questioned the boy. His name was Lucan, an orphan raised on the streets of Rome. Quick, observant, and clever. He had been working as a messenger for one of the secret Stoics, Senator Calvus. The senator had warned Lucan, "If anything happens to me, find Aelius Varro." Aelius's face darkened. "He's dead," he said flatly. But Lucan shook his head. "I saw how you looked at the sea. Like a man deciding whether to drown or rise." Aelius stared at him. The boy was right. Something had stirred. Not anger, but duty. That night, Aelius pulled from a hidden chest the last relics of his past, his worn leather armor, his ring marked with the crest of his legion, and an old dagger engraved with Stoic maxims, virtus ante omnia, virtue before all. He did not wear them yet. But he laid them out carefully, like a ritual. Then, he began to train. Each morning, as the sun rose, Aelius pushed his body past the stiffness of age and exile. His swordsmanship was rusty, but his mind was clear. Each movement was deliberate. Each breath, a meditation. Lucan watched him silently, amazed. The general was still there, buried, perhaps, but not broken. By the end of the week, Aelius stood taller. His beard trimmed, his eyes sharper. He had made a decision. He would return to Rome. Not for revenge. Not for glory. But to remind the empire what virtue looked like. He was no longer a general. Not yet. But the embers had begun to burn again. The road to Rome was long, carved through the hills and plains like a scar on the land. Aelius and Lucan traveled light, cloaked in rough wool, armed only with Aelius's dagger and a walking staff. No banners, no guards, only silence and wind. Aelius had chosen the old roads, ones known only to scouts and merchants. The main routes were watched. He knew this. The secret Stoic faction had warned him through the letter. The emperor's spies were everywhere. They traveled by night, resting by day. Aelius taught Lucan to read the sky for time, to listen for dangers in the rustle of grass, to blend into the silence. He trained the boy not in the way of warriors, but in the way of awareness, Stoic perception. One evening, as the sun bled over the horizon, they stopped by a crumbling stone milestone. It was marked with an old inscription, "To those who serve the Republic, not the man who wears its crown." Aelius ran his fingers over the worn letters. "They tried to warn us even then," he murmured. That night, they encountered their first threat. A campfire glowed in the distance, too bright, too careless. Aelius approached in silence, leaving Lucan hidden in the brush. 3 men sat around it, mercenaries by the look of them, armed but disorganized. Their voices were loud, slurred with drink. Aelius listened. One spoke of a bounty. "A man with a scar like a bolt of lightning down his left cheek," he said. "Goes by Aelius Varo. Word is, he's headed toward the capital." The others laughed. "Dead men don't walk," one sneered. Aelius stepped into the firelight. They froze. He didn't draw his blade. He didn't need to. His eyes were enough, icy, focused, patient. "I am Aelius Varo," he said calmly. "If you plan to collect a bounty, I suggest you send your employer my regards first." One reached for his sword. He never finished the motion. With swift precision, Aelius struck, disarming, not killing. He bound the men and left them tied to a tree with a single message carved in wood. "Virtue cannot be hunted." Lucan, though shaken, watched with admiration. "You didn't kill them," he said. "I don't kill for silence," Aelius replied. "Only for justice." They moved on. Each day brought new tests. A village burned by imperial tax collectors. A group of runaways hiding in the forest. A dying priest who blessed Aelius with trembling hands, whispering, "Rome needs you." And through it all, the boy learned, not just how to survive, but why one survives. The Stoic teachings came alive not in books, but in their choices: patience over anger, justice over vengeance, courage over fear. By the time they saw the silhouette of Rome's outer hills, Lucan was no longer a messenger. He was an apprentice in the philosophy of fire. And Aelius? He no longer walked like a ghost. He walked like a man returning home, not for war, but for reckoning. Rome. Even from a distance, it pulsed like a living beast, its walls looming, its towers clawing at the sky. Smoke curled lazily from 100 chimneys, but beneath the haze was something darker. Something wrong. Aelius and Lucan entered through the eastern gate just before dawn, blending with a caravan of traders. No one recognized him. Not yet. The streets were different now. He remembered them as filled with laughter, arguments, philosophy. But now? Guards on every corner. Banners of the emperor fluttering like silent warnings. People walked with their eyes downcast. Fear clung to the air like fog. Lucan whispered, "Is this what power does?" Aelius didn't answer. He only clenched his jaw and kept walking. They made their way to the Forum, once the heart of debate and thought. Now it was a shadow of itself. Where scholars once argued beneath the marble pillars, soldiers now stood with spears. The statue of Marcus Aurelius was gone, replaced by a massive sculpture of the emperor, cast in cold iron, holding a sword instead of a scroll. Aelius stared at it for a long time. "He's afraid," he muttered. Lucan looked up. "Of what?" "Of ideas." They found refuge in the cellar of an old bakery, once owned by a friend. The friend was gone, taken, the neighbors said, for speaking too much. But the cellar remained hidden, forgotten beneath the scent of old flour and smoke. There, by candlelight, Aelius met with the others. The last Stoics. 5 of them, cloaked and weathered, each one changed by exile and hiding. Among them was Cassia, once a senator's daughter, now the sharpest voice of the underground. She had fire in her eyes. "You shouldn't have come back," she said, arms crossed. "The city eats men like you now." "I didn't come to survive," Aelius replied. "I came to wake it up." They argued deep into the night. Cassia believed in subtlety, change through whispers, slow influence. Aelius had no patience left for whispers. The people have forgotten how to think, he said. They need someone who can remind them what virtue looks like. Not in words, in action. Lucan listened quietly, absorbing everything. The next morning, the city woke to something strange. In the center of the forum, someone had hung a banner from the emperor's statue. It read, "The wise man fears not the tyrant, but the silence of good men." The city buzzed. No one claimed responsibility. Whispers spread like fire. The emperor's spies swept the streets. Dozens were arrested. But the message had been seen. It was too late. Cassia confronted Aelius that night. "You're starting a war." "No," he said. "I'm starting a memory." In the days that followed, the resistance began to grow. Quiet at first, old philosophers emerged from hiding, scribes copied forbidden texts, small groups gathered to read the words of Epictetus in candlelit cellars. But so did the danger. One of the 5 Stoics was captured. His name was Titus, and he refused to speak under torture. Before he died, he carved the word freedom into the floor of his cell with his fingernail. The empire had awakened something it couldn't control. A fire, not of violence, but of virtue. And at the center of it stood Aelius. Unshaken. Focused. Ready. The palace was a world apart. While the streets of Rome groaned under fear and hunger, the emperor's halls shimmered with marble, gold, and silence. A sacred kind of silence, the kind that follows orders, not peace. In the throne room, the emperor sat alone, cloaked in white. A thin man, older than most believed, but kept alive by 1,000 comforts. His eyes were sharp. Not cruel, worse. Empty. At his side stood Varus, commander of the imperial guard. Loyal. Brutal. Unquestioning. "They've returned," Varus said, handing over a parchment. On it, a list of names. Cassia. Lucan. Aelius. The emperor read them slowly, his fingers barely moving. "I thought he would die in the north." "He didn't," Varus replied. A long pause. Then the emperor whispered, "Then he must die here." Meanwhile, in the underbelly of Rome, the Stoics moved like ghosts. Aelius, Cassia, and Lucan had begun restoring the circle, a secret gathering that once served as the center of Stoic philosophy during better times. Hidden in an old library beneath the baths, it became a flickering beacon for those willing to risk everything for truth. Every night, people came. Young scribes. Old merchants. Disillusioned soldiers. Even children. They sat in silence as Aelius spoke, not like a preacher, but like a man remembering a truth they had all forgotten. A man is not what he owns, or what he fears losing. A man is what he can endure, what he chooses in the face of fear. He spoke of courage, of self-control, of reason over rage. Cassia watched the crowd grow daily. "You're turning into a symbol," she warned. "Symbols don't bleed, people do." "I'm not here to be safe," Aelius replied. "I'm here to be seen." That same night, Varus struck. The circle was raided during a storm, soldiers bursting through the tunnels like wolves. But Lucan had seen it coming. He'd spent days watching the guards, marking their movements, and that night, he led a dozen followers through the sewage tunnels before the ambush. They escaped, barely. But the library was destroyed. Scrolls burned. Statues shattered. One old man, Marcus, a former tutor, was left behind. They found him later, sitting among the ashes, refusing to run. When Varus asked why, Marcus answered, "A man who cannot die for what he believes has no right to teach others how to live." He was executed in the forum. Publicly. The next morning, Aelius returned to the ruins of the library. No words. Just ashes. Lucan stood beside him, fists clenched. "We have to fight back." "We are," Aelius said. "But not with blades." He took a charred scroll from the floor. It crumbled in his hand. "We'll build again. Not just here, everywhere. Let the fire spread." Cassia nodded, her voice quiet. "And when they strike again?" Aelius looked toward the palace. "Then we'll show them what a Stoic looks like when everything else is gone." The city changed. Not all at once, but quietly, like cracks in a statue that deepen with each tremor. In the market, people whispered Aelius's name. In the barracks, young soldiers passed around fragments of Stoic texts. On walls, someone began painting a symbol, a circle within a square, the old Stoic mark of balance and control. It was everywhere now. Painted, carved, burned. The emperor saw it from his chariot. He said nothing. But his grip on the reins tightened. In the shadows of the city, Aelius moved like a man possessed. Not with anger, but with clarity. He and Lucan traveled from district to district, speaking to small gatherings, teaching the core of Stoicism through stories, parables, and lived example. You want to change Rome? Then change yourself. Rule your anger. Control your fear. That's where empires are truly built, inside. Cassia, meanwhile, became the silent engine behind the movement. She organized food for the poor, copied manuscripts by candlelight, protected messengers. The daughter of a senator, now living among beggars, leading from the shadows. But danger was always near. One evening, a boy named Felix, barely 15, was caught delivering letters to followers. The emperor made sure his punishment was public, a clear message. But it backfired. At Felix's funeral, hundreds came. None armed. None shouting. They stood in silence, heads bowed, refusing to leave for hours. It wasn't a riot. It was something worse. Defiance without violence. Faith without fear. Inside the palace, the emperor raged. I want Aelius broken, he roared. Not dead, broken. Make the people see his weakness. Varus bowed, then smiled faintly. Then we must take what he cannot replace. A week later, Cassia disappeared. Gone. Without a trace. Lucan searched every corner of the city, even the slums. But he found only one thing, a ring. Hers. Dropped near the eastern gate. Planted like a trap. He ran to Aelius. It's her. They took her. They know she matters to you. Aelius closed his eyes. Pain surged behind them. But when he opened them again, they were steady. Then they've given me a choice. Vengeance, or virtue. Lucan stared. And? I choose discipline, Aelius said. But I will not abandon her. That night, Aelius addressed the movement. His words were quieter than usual, but sharper. They think they can frighten us. That fear will scatter truth like wind scatters ash. But truth does not die in the dark. It waits. It watches. And then it returns, stronger. He raised a single, burned scroll. This is not just philosophy. It's a weapon. And now, it's war. The storm had been gathering for weeks. You could feel it in the streets of Rome, a growing tension, a murmur of defiance. The whispers of Aelius's name had turned into calls for change. It wasn't just in the markets anymore, but in the halls of the Senate, the barracks, even the palaces of the elite. Everywhere, the spirit of Stoic virtue was rising. But the emperor was not blind. He'd sent his agents, his spies, his forces to silence the movement, but Aelius had anticipated every move. They had evaded capture time and time again, and now, the stakes were higher. The emperor could no longer ignore the challenge to his authority. A showdown was inevitable. One final night, Aelius stood in the middle of the city, the moonlight casting long shadows on the worn cobblestones. He had come alone, as he had so many times before. The familiar echoes of his footsteps filled the silence, but this time, it felt different. There was no fear, no uncertainty in him now, only a resolute calm. His mind was clear. The years of exile, of loss, of struggle, all had led to this moment. He had not fought for fame, nor for glory, nor for revenge. He had fought to remind the people of Rome of their virtue, of their power to change the world by first changing themselves. But that night, the empire would seek to stamp it all out. The emperor had sent the full force of his legions to take him down. The battle would be fierce, but Aelius knew it would be their final clash. One last test of everything he had come to believe. As dawn broke, a rumble shook the city. It wasn't thunder. It was the sound of marching feet, thousands of soldiers, heading toward him. Aelius took one last look around. He could see the flickering lights of homes in the distance, the people who had come to believe in the idea of something better. They were ready. They weren't afraid anymore. The emperor's forces surrounded the plaza, the sound of their armor clanking and their swords drawn. Varus, the emperor's most loyal commander, stood at the front, his eyes locked on Aelius. He had been sent to finish this, to erase the flame that had started burning in the hearts of the people. You're outnumbered, Varus said, his voice cold. Aelius looked at him without flinching. Virtue cannot be outnumbered. Without warning, the battle began. But this was not just any fight. It was a fight for the soul of an empire. Aelius did not strike first. He stood firm, allowing the soldiers to approach, his face calm and unmoving. His movements were deliberate, graceful. He was not fighting for victory. He was fighting for truth. Each strike he made was a statement. Each movement, a lesson in restraint and control. The chaos of battle surrounded him, but inside, he was at peace. His body moved with the rhythm of a Stoic warrior, not out of anger, but out of a deep understanding of what it meant to endure. Varus charged toward him, sword raised. But before he could land the blow, Aelius sidestepped, using the momentum against him. In a single fluid motion, he disarmed Varus, knocking him to the ground. Varus stood, his expression one of disbelief. "Why?" he demanded. "Why fight for a cause that will be crushed?" Aelius looked him in the eye, his voice steady. "Because a man cannot stand by and do nothing. We fight not for ourselves, but for the future of others. That is what makes us free." With those words, Varus fell silent, his sword dropped. Aelius turned away, knowing that the fight was not over. It had never been about one man's victory. It was about the courage to live by virtue, even when the world demanded otherwise. The battle continued, but now the odds were changing. As Aelius's followers joined the fight, the tide shifted. The people of Rome, inspired by his teachings, fought not with rage, but with resolve. They fought to restore what had been lost, their dignity, their freedom, and their soul. When the sun finally rose higher in the sky, the emperor's forces were in retreat. The people of Rome had won. The empire was no longer ruled by fear, but by the courage of those who had dared to challenge its darkness. Aelius stood among the fallen soldiers, his clothes stained with the dust of battle. He had not come to conquer. He had come to awaken the spirit of virtue in others. And as the echoes of the battle faded, he knew that the true victory had already been won. He turned to Lucan, who stood beside him, his eyes full of awe. "It's done," Lucan said softly. Aelius nodded. "No. It's just beginning." And as they looked out over the city, Aelius's voice carried one final message, a message that would echo through the ages. "You are not what you have lost, or what you have gained. You are what you choose to be, in every moment, in every battle." And so, the people of Rome, and perhaps the world, were reminded of the most enduring truth of all: the greatest battle is the one fought within.